After some conversations and many months of this degenerate schmuck asking me to review it, it's time to go back and talk about Fleet Command, where collateral damage is part of the course as you direct various navies across the seas. Developed by Sonalists and originally published in 1999, it's managed to survive abandonware status through distribution on Steam at extremely low prices. I got mine for a few bucks. I was pleasantly surprised that it works on Windows 10 and has the manual included, though it is lacking in resolution options and seems to be missing the live action videos that would play between missions. But the music's here and it only crashes unoccasionally, so whatever. While I'm not a hardcore milsimmer, I do enjoy the occasional one. Some of my favourite games are titles like Operation Flashpoint or Wargame. This is because they know how to be accessible as video games while also allowing enough depth for diehards to dig through. Fleet Command often comes up in relation to other naval wargames like Command, Air, Land and Sea, but on a budget. As my aforementioned buddy explained to me, it's a good way of gauging your interest of the genre at minimal cost. After playing many hours of Fleet Command, I concur. I'd actually consider it a very informative piece of software that portrays how crucial navies have become in modern warfare and defining geopolitical conflicts. Navies aren't that large in real life. You'll never see dozens of ships side to side and only a handful of countries have airborne capabilities. Since the game's release, China and India have developed substantial naval forces, and Russia's last aircraft carrier is basically beyond repair, while America's added like 3 more in the last decade. Knowing these military branches is still invaluable in understanding the hard power nation-states wield. Onto the actual game, from the footage it seems very complicated. All these lines, symbols, and pixels and shit. What are these terrible janky models? This is trash, get it out of here. Really though, it's less a traditional game where you build fortifications or units. Here your forces are essentially a toolkit of powerful, accurate, yet fragile weapons platforms that need to be used correctly in order to win. When you launch into the game, you have a few tutorials that give you the basics of controlling units, basic objectives, along with a reference list of various equipment used by more than a dozen nations. Strangely, this doesn't include either careers unless you add mods. The campaign is a series of 4 different complex stages that need to be completed sequentially, while the mission list is all sorts of scenarios that range from easy to hard. The tutorials are decent, but if you're unfamiliar with military codes, acronyms and concepts, then reading the instruction manual is highly recommended. Credit to Sonalis, the manual actually details the paths to completing each and every included mission, and because they gradually increase in complexity, you can follow the guide becoming very intermediate with Fleet Command. There's a large selection of nations you can play and battle against. Unsurprisingly, the most advanced is the US, followed by China and Russia. Other countries that pop up include the UK, France, India and Japan, though they correctly play much smaller roles on account of their reduced naval presence. For the campaign, the overarching story is a scenario where a renewed Russia teams up with an expansionist China with the help of India to challenge the Southeast Asian and European status quo with conflicts surrounding Burma, Sri Lanka, Japan and Taiwan. For most of the game, you're leading different US task forces in missions to destroy facilities, protect convoys, search and destroy opposing fleets, navigate hostile waters, and complete evacuations, all while being as efficient as possible. This is stuff we've seen plenty of times in RTSs, though for me, it's the framing that's so appealing. Time for some digression. Fleet Command came at a very interesting time of geopolitics. This was the high point of interventionism, and the world had gradually accepted American unipolarity after the collapse of the Soviet Union. China had begun liberalizing, the EU was expanding, and everyone was reading Fukuyama's End of History. The interventions in Grenada, Panama, Sierra Leone, Kosovo, Somalia, and the Gulf War were comparably clear-cut, good versus bad. It makes the framing of the game much less cynical than in, like, say, Call of Duty, Spec Ops: The Line, Arma, and Battlefield. Anyhow, the almost sole focus on playing as one country can seem a little repetitive, especially when the US is demonstrably more powerful. On the other hand, it's sensible in enabling the largest array of tactics and giving enough wriggle room for incompetent players to at least complete the game. US aircraft and ships are equipped with the best armaments and complemented by impeccable electronic and sensory gear that allows you to detect incoming threats and respond in good time. The firepower you have on offer can easily decimate the opposition on land, air and sea. The large pool of fightercrafts that can be infinitely rearmed and refueled means you can overwhelm anything that gets in your way. The challenge, however, lays in doing the job well and not fucking it up. It's easy to hammer and nail it, less so without hitting your thumb, bending it, or snapping the timber, or blowing up a 747 with hundreds of civilians on board. The game has little cutscenes that relay tidbits of info and knowledge, although this one perhaps summarizes the best.
In the old days, a fleet commander had hours, even days, to plan a battle. Today we have seconds, if we're lucky, minutes. He acts too quickly, innocents die. He hesitates, his men die.
Following this advice is how you complete missions with a good performance track without repeating all those heated missile moments. The UI is surprisingly good. Pressing F1 brings up a list of hotkeys and the manual outlines each and every command prompt. Annoyingly, you're not given descriptions in-game. The two display screens are the situation map where you click and move units, and the 3D camera is mostly for added presentation. The right mouse button lists commands and issue orders, and the left button selects units. If that sounds simple, it's because it is. You can quite comfortably play the entire game with a mouse and a dozen key combinations, as much of the action is automatic. The 3D camera is the most gamey element as you track different planes and ships as they fire and avoid missiles. The details added are fantastic, from planes getting to position before taking off, ship hulls breaking apart and sinking, how ejected pilots will parachute all the way down before rescuing a life raft before rescue, and of course, following volleys of missiles as they home into their target. It's nail-biting stuff, and extremely satisfying seeing irritating bombers and cruisers getting knocked out after a drawn-out fight. You're no doubt aware I'm not a naval tactician who watches hours of documentaries on YouTube, partly contributing to the lack of finesse on display, absent air corridors or waypoints. The other reason is the game's kind of easy. The aforementioned power of the US Navy simply obliterates the quote-unquote hard missions. I only struggle when the game locked up, my units failed to properly refuel, I lacked proper electronic warfare gear making detection difficult, and finding some annoyingly hidden submarines which can easily take upwards of an hour. You can save at any time, and despite missions being slightly randomized in enemy placement, you can reliably guesstimate where to immediately attack after the first attempt. Enemy AI is good at surprise ambushes and going after most valuable units, and will exploit your weaknesses effectively. However, this doesn't carry on to aggressiveness. You might face a few stories of enemy planes or missile attacks from frigates, but after setting your units to automatically counting them in the options, you don't have to worry. Aircraft carriers can spew out sorties in mere minutes with ASM and Maverick missiles that clean house. Even the best anti-air systems can't hold off a dozen separate missile attacks all at once. When you're confronted with stiff defenses or enemy subs, just remember to jam their radar or order planes to search a zone. Now they're totally fucked. Now there's gonna be a bunch of people racing to comment about how I should play user missions and get mods instead, and I agree. Install the NWP mod, which adds in countries like North and South Korea and a bazillion new units and much harder scenarios. But I'm sick of this shit. I'm not gonna bend over that much for one viewer, as much as I love ya. I got shenanigans and other shit on my plate. The game's like $3 when on sale, which happens all the time. It works on Windows 10, and so there's little reason to not recommend it when you can blow up aircraft carriers with a dozen missiles from your nuclear-powered submarine as you blare the Ace Combat soundtrack in the background. Damn.